Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Warhammer Quest Darkwater is very nearly with us, and I've been extremely lucky and I've been sent an early review set by Games Workshop. If you'd like to see my unboxing and review of it, you can catch that here. That video is already out. But today's video is a painting video. I thought it would be fun to paint one of my favourite miniatures from the set, Mulgoth The Cleaver. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems and offer custom items to suit your club or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Make sure you check out their old world compatible range. It's expanding all the time. New ranges are being added soon. Look at these fantastic generals tokens to help those of you who are forgetful remember in-game effects and spells and things like that. And look at these old world legacy army token sets as well. Again, more of these are being added all the time and very nice they are. Check out the link in the video description. So there are a huge amount of miniatures in this set, loads of really cool ones, and I had to choose which one to paint for an article on Warcom. You may have seen the image up there already, and this was the one I chose, Mulgoth The Cleaver. And as soon as I saw it, I thought I want to work on that armor, and I really want to work on that big gruesome arm, and already knew how I would paint it, and it should be a relatively quick paint job. And here's a brief hint of what you're going to see painted throughout the video. Simple, straightforward black prime with a rattle can, and we're ready to go. And I'm going to work on the armour first. We have bronze and light bronze here. These are from Pro Acryl, but essentially you want to pick a duller bronze or gold colour, and you'll tend to find a different paint ranges. Some will call things gold and others will call them bronze, and technically yes, they are different colour, but the interpretation of which is which varies. But I'm using my airbrush to give a nice overall covering, but I'm trying to add a little bit of angle here as well, almost zenithal-esque, so that a little bit of the shadow remains in the undercuts on the miniature. Just working with angles and working with where light would hit on a miniature really helps you build up definition overall and builds mood into the piece. And just working with those two colours, going back with the second one now and highlighting where the light would hit more on those armor plates, making sure that duller bronze is still showing underneath, and by keeping to this angle you don't completely obliterate all of the paint that you've already put down. Next up, a little bit of dry brushing. This is a mithril colour from Army Painter's Speed Paint. You can use any really bright silver. I like ones that appear to have a little bit of shine rather than dead, and this is the closest I can get to some of my favourite shades at the moment, using a round style dry brush and a dry palette. Nearly all of the paint back off the brush. I'm just picking out the chainmail and some of the edges of the armour. I really want to be light here. I don't want to cover any of the flat areas of the armor. I don't want it to look dull and silver. I want to just really pick out the detail. And this miniature I think looks pretty cool at the end of it, and I hope you'll think that too. But there's a lot of simple processes in doing this as well, and you can get really nice effective looking miniatures without turning them all into sort of golden demon winning pieces. I'm not capable of that, but you can still have something that looks pretty impressive on the table just by following a few simple techniques. And if you have an airbrush, yeah, you can go a long way. Now if you don't have an airbrush, the first two stages are going to be quite hard, but you could start with a nice gold spray, and you can follow a lot of the rest of the tutorial without an airbrush. Not all of it, but a lot of it. This is just black paint here, Intense from AK. I really like it. There's lots of good blacks out there, to be honest with you. Just tends to be one I reach for quite often. And this is a stage I don't often do because it does add an extra layer of time, but the back to black stage. But I wanted to do it in this instance, partly to really show you the definition between the armor and what I'm going to work on with the skin, and also the next stage, which is coming up now, which is masking the miniature off. I want to airbrush the arm as well because it's the quickest way of getting nice transitions with the skin. So I'm using some liquid mask here. I'm using a clay shaper, which is a rubber-ended tool, to paint it on with. If you use bristles, you basically knacker that brush after one use. So this is great because you can just peel it off afterwards, but more on the masking later. And now on to skin. I'm using a triad from Two Thin Coats here, but you can use any 3 shades of skin really that work from you. The most important thing for this process is base, mid and highlight, and I will put all of my paint colours on my Patreon later, so if I forget to mention something or misspeak, then you can go and have a look at it there. It's available to free members, so you don't have to pay anything to look at it. You can of course just pause this video. I will do my best to hold up every paint that I use, and I generally do. But again, working with the angle here of the miniature in terms of lighting, so that base layer of paint, the darkest colour, the pinkest colour, goes on first, but a nice thin layer, so that there's lots of that black showing through. I want to keep that shadow in there because it will really save me time and stop me having to do loads of thin glaze layer of highlighting. So it's sticking to this angle. You can see you've got a slightly lighter colour of flesh now in the airbrush, really working with that angle, keeping the previous colours in, including the black there, and focusing on those raised areas where the light would hit, so catching the very tip of the elbow with the airbrush here. Now this takes a little bit of practice. I've been airbrushing for a few years. There'll be people that can do it even better than I can and do the smallest areas with an airbrush, but even if you're relatively sort of new user to an airbrush, as soon as you've got some control, you can definitely get some kind of approximation of this just by playing around with yourself, keeping those other colours in there. But you've got to be quite gentle with it, quite light. Try and focus on just a certain area of the musculature, not blasting the whole thing with the next colour. Hopefully there you can see I'm building in a nice little bit of variation of that skin tone by doing it like this. Now I have some bonish colours, so this is Skeleton Legion and Vampire Fan, also from Two Thin Coats. While I've got all that armour masked off, it's not blue, that's the colour of the masking over the top of it. I'm just focusing on the little bit of fabric that's peeking out from the bottom of that chainmail and doing 2 coats with it. And the reason I'm doing it with the airbrush again is to give me a really nice, smooth, quick transition, which saves some time. And while I'm at it, I can catch some of the handle of his big axe as well, where it's got some wraps and things on it. And then it's time to peel that masking off, and as soon as you've got a little bit off, you can make it into a ball and then rub it onto the next layer and it peels off. And I love masking. This stuff's made by AK. The Vallejo one's very good as well, but liquid masking is now my favourite way of masking, because I'm able to cover large irregular areas relatively quickly. The only thing is it does run, so you have to wait for it to set, which doesn't take long before you turn the miniature and move on to the next stage. But it comes off relatively easily, and this is what you got afterwards. So I've got all of that metals protected, I've got the little bit of the fabric done, and I've got the skin base layer. Now it's back for a little bit more dry brushing just on the tops of those horns. I gave them a quick blast with the airbrush when I was putting through those bone colours. I'm just dry brushing a little bit more of that white over the top, picking up some of the detail on there because we're going to glaze over the top in a moment. And I just return as well with that same white dry brush just to the very edges of that fabric, including the wraps around that handle, really to pick out that detail as well. Now for some more sponging, and I'm actually going to use this little Cuba sponge here, which I get from Knott's Hobbies in the UK. There's a link in the video description, which includes the dry palette I'm using here as well. I'm just picking it off so it's a little bit more irregular. It's the same kind of sponge you get with makeup sponges. Put it in the holder, which is also from Knott's Hobbies, and then I can turn it into a nice little sponging tool. I'm using pale skin here to add a little bit of mottled texture to the skin, a very little bit. It just gives a little bit more variation, because this arm is going to look pretty gross by the time I've finished with it, and this just adds a little bit more detail. You could do stippling with a normal brush if you wanted to as well, but using sponging like this is much quicker. Now time for some Skeleton Horde, one of my favourite paints around at the moment, one of the most versatile paints, and I tend to use it in most miniatures these days. I'm just glazing it into the recesses of that tiny bit of fabric that's showing at the front and back underneath his chainmail. It's also perfect to add onto the wraps, the bandage style wraps that are on the handle of that huge axe, and it also forms the perfect basis for the first layer of those horns as well. I've dry brushed it so you've got that extra detail, and you put this stuff on as a smooth glaze all over, just enough to go into the recesses, and it's a really nice base to work from. Now it's time to finish those horns. I'm using Agarash Dunes and Sigmar Brown. I'm going to be using them straight after one another. The Agarash Dunes is a slightly stronger in pigment, yellower version of the Skeleton Horde in all intents and purposes. So about halfway up, I'm painting in that colour, and it just darkens the area compared to the area that's just covered with the skeleton horde. And then after that, straight away, I'm going in with some of the Sigmar brown. I'm doing this at the same time because I want it to wet blend together, so you don't have to worry about feathering out those areas. So you've got this nice transition from skeleton horde all the way up to Sigmar brown, the darker tips of the antlers. Now it's time to start working on a little bit more of that skin. So I've got Shyish Purple, Vulpus Pink, and Mantis Warriors Green. The Shyish Purple and Vulpus Pink I use all the time on my tutorials for skin. I use the purple to shade, I use the pink to add a little bit more warmth and texture to faces. Often on normal miniatures, I'm adding the purple around the edges of areas around where cuffs meet hands, and then the pinks is over the nose and faces, and maybe the bridge of the hands are in between the knuckles and things. But here I'm shading in much the same way, but just the darker areas of the skin. And the purple's quite thin, so you can tend to use it straight out of the pot. And the Vulpus Pink has got a little bit more punch to it, so I tend to have it on my wet palette and add a little bit of water, and then I just add it to a little bit of area like this for shading, and then just use a little bit of water to feather it out and glaze it out. So lots of thin playing around here, and this is where this arm starts to get its real depth and grossness. You've got that shadow underneath there already because it's almost black, where the airbrush doesn't quite reach, so you've got that smoother transition. And just by adding in that Vulpus Pink and the Shyish Purple, you're able to start sort of glazing all of those areas together, give lots of variations in that skin. If you look at your hands, if you're Caucasian, if you look at your hands and you're a bit pasty like me, you can see your veins through, so you can see greens, you can see blues, you can see pinks, and this is what we're trying to achieve a little bit with the skin. But we're also trying to get the idea of it being a little bit sickly, so having lots of variation underneath very, very sort of thin and ugly pale skin makes it look super cool as well. And in the more final stages, I'm just glazing on that Mantis Warriors Green, partly into this sort of carved in wood. I'm sure in Age of Sigmar that symbol means something. For me, I'm just treating it as a sort of a burnt in scar or something, where little patches of the green almost looks yellow. Returning to the Sigmar brown now, I'm working at the bottom of this hand again, so they're almost claw-like on the studio paint job. They look really, really dark and then just blend into the skin. That's exactly what I'm doing here, working from the tips and then adding a little bit of water and just blending back into the skin until you get this smooth transition from the flesh area we've just been working on, an almost pure Sigmar brown, which is very deep, rich, reddish brown at the ends of the claw. Here I'm returning to that Mantis Warriors Green that I was using a little bit on the skin, partly for uniformity across the miniature, keeping the palette limited so that there's the overall piece looks a little bit more unified. But also I was really inspired by the studio paint jobs, where you've got this sort of greenish suggestion in the armour. It still looks metallic, but it also looks green as well, which is right for Nurgle. But I didn't want to go for that kind of painted armour look that you often see with the green of Nurgle. I wanted something a little bit more subtle, and I wanted it to be unmistakably metallic. And that's why I started with the metals here. But by glazing in the Mantis Warriors Green just in areas, there's a suggestion of the green there without taking away the metallics, and suggestion of Nurgle and the sickliness of it. But it's still, as I say, undeniably metallic and keeping him the mood of sickliness with the rest of the miniature. Gone for something relatively simple with the base, but I didn't want to go anywhere near any tufts or any sort of normal style Warhammerish base. And many people in the comments from my review video talking about maybe putting them on square bases if you're an old world fan, and would that affect gameplay? And actually I'm thinking now maybe it wouldn't, and maybe I'll rebase this gentleman and base all my miniatures on squares so that I can use them for old world should I want to. That's a later video coming this week when I talk about what use they could have in old world. But back to here, while the sort of the muddy base layer is still there, I'm just adding a little bit of this sort of lighter grayer texture paint essentially, which is great for World War II when you've got that greyish style mud. But just by sort of wet mixing it in a little bit, just gives a little bit of suggestion of different colours. I want it to look a little bit of a mess, because I want it to work with different pages in that big game book. They've all got different environments, so you need something that's can kind of hint at other things. And this is a super bright yellow here. As you can see, sun bleached yellow is a really, really top highlight. You use any bright yellow, even something a little bit more pus-like, but this will do the job. And I'm literally dotting on some of these little spot areas on the arm. You don't have to paint them as pustules, you can just paint them as warty bumps or something. But I think they really stand out now as something a little bit brighter from all of the purples and all of the reds and some of the sort of greenish tones that are in that flesh already. So this just stands out, gives the flesh even more gruesome character. And when we add some more effects a little bit later on, it just ties them in extra nice, I think. These are a couple of ready mixed oil washes. One's grime, it's a kind of greenish colour, and one's grease, which is more of a sepia colour. And I'm using these to add all my washes to the armour. Again, you may be new to the channel, or having just looked at Warhammer Quest, and I use oil paints a lot. I use oil washes an awful lot in place of standard washes. So the closest thing you'd have here really would be something like the Militarum green contrast paint thinned, and maybe something like a Seraphim Sepia. The reason I use the oil washes is because of the way they behave. You need an old brush for them, and you will mess up your brushes if you use your best ones, but use an old brush on them, and then they really recess shade very nicely, and when they dry you get this really nice sort of weathered effect in all the recesses. And the beauty of them, they don't pool on the flat areas at all, and if they do a little bit, you can wipe them off, and you can't do that with any standard washes. Once they're in a stained area, they stain that surface or leave a horrible watermark or something, and you have to go back with that base color again to almost repaint it. And you just don't need to do that with oil paints at all, and that's why I prefer to use them than standard washes. And you just see here it's a little bit thinner, runs into all those recesses, so it's a bit like a recessed shade, but you can just slap it all over if you really wanted to, but there's no need for that here. I'm being a little bit more subtle. I've not protected the miniature first at all, no varnishing needed. I'm working on top of metallic paints that are pretty robust, so I'm just being careful here and keeping it just on the metal areas. But the effects of it overall, especially on a miniature that's Nurgle and you've got these rotting armour, then I think it's perfect. It goes in all the recesses here of all that chainmail perfectly, much better than any standard wash would. I'm just using a healthy mix of both the green and the grease colour, and then after that I carry it over down onto the base as well. It just runs into all that texture from the texture paint, which is a bit like your stone and mud kind of stuff, and shades all that as well and makes it look super grim and grimy. And this is some fast drying thinner. You can use a Santador. You just don't want to use any kind of white spirits that are used for DIY, because that really will take your paint off. And I'm using a cotton bud here, or Q-tip I believe they're called in the US. You can use a little bit of sponge as well, and you just take it back off the surface. So I talked about it not pulling on the surface, and generally it doesn't, but it might add a very, very fine filter to that. And a lot of the time you can just wipe it straight off without any thinner at all. But if you really want to take it back and it'll be a little bit shiny in certain areas, just a slight dab of white spirit, take most of it back off so it's just damp, and then just focus on those areas where the light is hitting, and it just takes all that oil paint straight back off. You get this really beautiful definition between this high shine areas and the grim and dirty shadowed areas. And of course it's Nurgle, so we have to have some rust, and Dirty Down Rust is by far, in my opinion, the easiest to use and most versatile rust product out there on the market. There's lots out there. There's lots of enamel based ones, lots of oil based ones, which work very similarly the way I was just describing the other oil paints, so they're great. But this stuff is water based. It's still nasty stuff. You don't want to be licking your brush after you're using it, but you can use your regular brushes on it. I still tend to use a slightly older brush. And it's very versatile, so you can thin it and blend it out and feather it. You can also add it in small concentrations. The darker it gets, it makes it look like really sort of damp, ingrained rust. And when it's a little bit thinner, it starts to look like slightly lighter rust, and you can go back and build it up layer after layer. And you can see me doing that here a little bit, where I put a splodge on, feather it out a little bit so it's thinly stained, and then once that's dry, I go back and you get these multi-layers of rust, or something that appears like there's multi-layers of rust working away there. I just love it. It's so easy to use. You can paint on rust marks or streaks. It's thin enough that you can put around rivets and things, so it just looks like the rivet's dusty. You can also do larger areas to really make it look like a certain area of armour or something is corroding. You could definitely get carried away with it and do far too much. You do be mindful of that. I don't think I went too far here. I focused on the areas of the miniature which clearly show the most corrosion and corruption, but I think it looks all right. Now I'm actually returning to a little bit of that mithril silver from Army Painter again. really small brush. It's not a dry brush, just an older brush here. I'm going to do a little bit of over brushing rather than full on dry brushing. So just catching the edges of the chainmail to really make them stand out as a slightly different armor. But while I'm at it, I can just catch the edges of some of the armor as well to make sure that it looks like it's been scratched back to the metal. Not only does it give you some variation in terms of color of metal yet again on the miniature, especially now we've added all these different glaze layers on and all these different effects. We started to dull down the work we did with the airbrush right at the start, but it also adds a little bit of definition between areas on the miniature and the areas of the armor, almost working the same way as edge highlighting might work, and I think that's really good as well. Even just in the flatter area here on the front of the helmet, just dabbling a little bit on, just to really bring up where that light would catch the most there and really boost it, just where the eye would be naturally drawn to the miniature around a face or a helmet or something like that. So I'm just being careful not to do too much here. So it's a little bit more than just dry brushing. I'm stippling, I'm over brushing, I'm just catching the edge here and there. I'm just making it pop a bit more. Now that the basing is all dry and that oil is all dry, I'm just using a little bit of dry pigment here. This is called City Dirt, but you can go with anything that's kind of whitish or chalkish really. Just adding little areas in, blowing the excess off, just again give a little bit more variation into that base. Super simple, I just want it to look different to a normal grassy field with tufts kind of thing. Of course, it's Warhammer and it's a Chaos miniature, so it's going to have some blood for the blood god on it somewhere, even if it's a different Chaos god. And the trick is less is more always with blood effects. I'm sure if I gave this to my 11-year-old or definitely my 6-year-old, it would go crazy and it'd be all over the place. The trick is here, you can see me using it as a bit of a glaze. And it's partly because this effects paint has quite shiny properties to it, almost some gloss built into it. So you thin it with water and paint it over certain areas of the skin, especially over all of those sort of pustules and things. Not only does it add a little bit of a further red tone to the skin, it makes that area slightly glistening. So it's not just all about it being direct blood splatter. You can use it as a paint as well and actually get some really decent effects from it. So I'm just using it to make those redder areas, those most gruesome areas of the skin there, look that little bit more angry, look that little bit more greasy and nasty, and I think that really helps and adds to the effect while being really easy to do. Of course, it's not all just his blood either, so I like to add the odd little splatter onto the arm, a little streak here where some foe has been dismembered by him and maybe there's a little bit of splatter or something left over. You don't always have to have a story for every blood splatter or every mark, but again it adds some extra detail, something else for your eye to be drawn to on the armour. And of course you can add it to the weapon as well. Just be mindful of how much, how wet it looks and what kind of effect you want. Is it blood that's a few hours old that started to dry on, or is it completely fresh and still dripping? Nice little bit on the base as well. And there's a lot of blood on this, but I still don't think I've gone too far. It's often about how thick you apply it in certain areas. It's grim, it's gruesome, it's Warhammer. We'll just finish off the base now. I love black rims on my bases, and I'm pretty happy with him. He worked out the way I wanted to, and I had that in my mind, what I wanted to do with this miniature. But let's have a look at some proper pictures. Hopefully the better lighting here will show up what I was trying to achieve there. You'll notice if you've watched the whole tutorial there that there's very little high skill work with the brush in terms of really detailed. There's no freehand, there's no really delicate edge highlighting, there's not hours and hours spent slowly building up layers or desperately hard blends of anything like that. A lot of that was taken care of with the airbrush and then just using lots of glazes, which I've made mostly out of contrast paint, so the job's half done for you there. Lots of little tricks using contrast paint, the underpainting, the dry brushing and things really speeds this up, and it means that you can produce a miniature like this in sort of about 3 hours or so, and I had lots of fun doing it. There are more details I could have picked out for sure. I was a little bit pressed for time to do it, but I'm happy with the way it looks, and if I had my whole set painted like this, I'd be extremely happy as well. And I think it's a reasonable amount of time to have a nice looking characterish miniature, but still have enough time to paint all my other collections. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I absolutely love painting grim and dirty and weathered things. So Nurgle in this set is absolutely perfect, and I'm picking one of my favourite miniatures from the set as well. It was really, really enjoyable. I just wish I had time to paint the whole set and do one massive painting video to show it all, but it would be too much. And at least this gives an idea of how you may go on and paint the Nurgle half of this, at least the armoured stuff. And if you're looking ahead to the new Age of Sigmar Nurgle forces on their way, this could be a really good sort of tutorial base, or give you some ideas for that as well. So hopefully this video will be useful for many people wherever you find it. If you're not going to copy my techniques, maybe you're miles better painter than I am. Hopefully you just enjoyed listening to what I was rabbiting on about at the time, but I had fun doing it whatsoever. And now, if you did enjoy the video, please do give it a like and drop a comment below. That really, really helps the video out. And if you'd like to help me out even more, please do check out the links in my video description. The most important one is my Patreon. It is the way I can continue to keep making videos like this. It takes a long time to paint and edit and all those things. And my patrons definitely keep the lights on in regards to me being able to make painting content like this. So thank you very much to them. And if you'd like to see more of this stuff more often, supporting me on Patreon is the best way of doing it. Check out the link to the Warhammer merch store as well. It's getting close to Christmas now. If you want to get those Christmas gifts in, or you've got loved ones asking you, what can I get you? Send them a link via my affiliate link, and it gives me a little kickback. And if you can't afford to support me on Patreon and things, it's a really nice way of supporting me there. Please also check out the channel sponsor, Counter Attack Bases. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.